Welcome to a special edition of The Big Picture from ETV Upstate in Spartanburg. I'm Betsy Fleming, president of Converse College, and I'm pleased to be leading this discussion today on initiatives that advance women in our state and which in turn enhance families, communities, and workplaces. As the president of a women's college, I witness firsthand on a daily basis how efforts to advance girls and women can have a transformative impact on spheres far beyond those individuals. Women in South Carolina are playing an increasingly important role in our state, but there are still many more areas that greater involvement from and focus on women and girls could positively impact our state. Coming up, we will discuss initiatives that encourage the development of girls and women to be important contributors to the community and our state. But first, we meet Corey Silvers, who, with the help of the Center for Women in Charleston, is the successful owner of Teacups and Trucks, an enterprise that supports the making of memories for children and families in the Charleston area.
Initial reason I started Teacups and Trucks was because I love working with children, but didn't want to do it in necessarily like a school setting. I wanted to do something where I could have a lot of fun with them, and I also love to decorate. So put the two together, and that's how I came up with Teacups and Trucks. We just want to make it very stress-free for the parents, and just provide them with a day that they can focus on their child and the kids that are at the party. Today is a rock star party that we're doing for a little girl, Ellie, who's turning 10. And we're having it here at Spirit Moves, which is a dance and yoga studio here in Charleston. Because our business is mobile, we don't have a building. We go to people's homes, or we've done some parties on some boats. We can pretty much go anywhere and set up the party for you. And when I started Teacups and Trucks, everyone kept saying, you need to go down to the Center for Women. They can help you with a business plan and job counseling and everything there is to know about starting up a business. With the microloan that we received from the Center for Women, we purchased a van for our business, which in turn increased our business threefold. We were able to do more parties. I could have other girls doing other parties off-site, so it really helped us a lot with increasing our business. Without the Center for Women, there's no doubt that I'd be where I am in my business right now, because they gave me that loan that helped me get this van. Without that, I could only do a certain amount of parties every weekend. And without their guidance, and really it's like a family down there. They really care about me and my business and where I'm going, and they want to see me succeed. So they're just a good team to have on my side.
Joining me in the studio today to discuss the unique initiatives to advance women and communities in South Carolina are Barbara Racks of the Racks Group, and also a board member for the Southeastern Institute for Women in Politics, and Forrest Alton, CEO of the South Carolina Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Forrest, you know better than most how serious our challenges are in this state to overcome teen pregnancy issues and to advance the well-being of families. What are some of the direct results of your initiatives to reduce teen pregnancy in South Carolina?
Well, we know, as you said, how serious of an issue this is in our state, and how serious the outcomes and consequences are. Teen pregnancy is linked to a host of other social issues, whether that's the health and well-being of the children, or outcomes for the parents, or almost as troubling as the social costs or the economic price tag to all of us. But still, 10,000 or so girls under the age of 20 every year in our state become pregnant. It's a huge number. And in fairness, we have seen great declines over the last decade or so, but still obviously have a lot of work to do in this area.
Barbara, you commit so much of your time to encouraging women to get involved in political office. And I think to think about the well-being of families and children, we need to ensure there is a wonderful infrastructure of support. In your work, how do you see women's involvement helping to develop policies and structures that enable the well-being of families and communities?
Well, Betsy, as you know, we have a single-gender Senate, and we have less than 9% of the legislative body that is made up of women. Yet, those are the people who are making the decisions about what our education funding is going to be, what our health opportunities or policies are going to be. They are approaching these without the perspective of the women who are going to be served, or in most cases, according to Blue Cross Blue Shield, make 90% of the purchasing decisions in those areas. So we strongly feel that women, being 51% of our population, need to have a strong voice in those bodies where the policies are being made. And it will impact, I think, all of the things we bring to the table. We're in those roles of being the child, the parent-teacher meeting, or sitting in the bleachers, or taking the kid to the pediatrician, and we're the ones who have the opinions that should be offered in those bodies.
And should at least be represented at the table.
Absolutely.
And in consideration of what the impact is, not just on a state budget, but also on the individual lives of families and the impact on a community itself in terms of sustaining a policy that
and the choices that are available to those family members and to the community.
Sure. What do you, in your work, what do you think the biggest obstacle is in terms of getting women involved in politics? We have no female state senators right now. We have a very small percentage of our legislative body. What's a big obstacle for you in your work around the state?
It's women's own self-imposed doubts. Women can be more qualified than their male counterparts, yet they feel inadequate to the job. You know, we've always said that women need to work harder to get to the same place. If you ask a woman, will you run for office? She'll say, oh, me? I'm not qualified. If you ask a man the same question, the chances are they'll say, well, will you give me a contribution if I do? So our biggest obstacle is really the doubts that women have within themselves. Those are, you know, hundreds of years old. They come from not having had leadership roles much outside of the community and outside the family. But women are natural leaders. So if we can persuade them to take those skills that they exercise every day in their businesses, in their homes, in the schools, in their community, and run for office, elected or appointed, they have at least as many skills, and they can certainly make a huge impact.
What I like seeing in my role as president of Converse is seeing young women step into their leadership voice, their leadership power, and how much that is their efforts as they embrace this power is not just to have power for power's sake, but to affect a change in an organization, in the college community, in another initiative that they're involved with.
Absolutely. Women tend to run for office because they're passionate about an issue. There's something that they want to see changed. Men, and I don't mean to paint too broad a brushstroke,
no offense
but
taken.
men frequently run for business reasons, for power, for a different kind of purpose than women. Women want to change the structure in the community, and they want to impact the issue on which they started there.
But they're fearful in stepping up and stepping out. And I would imagine self-esteem is something that in your work with girls around the state, that self-esteem may play into teen pregnancy in general. I don't know if that is an obstacle for you as you work with girls. Talk a little bit about that, Forrest.
Yeah, you know, speaking of obstacles, and as a part of this conversation, I'm struck by some of the things that Barbara said, and it seems that, you know, we have the need for a paradigm shift, if you will, when it comes to leadership and roles. And I think about the issue of teen pregnancy specifically and obstacles, and I'm also struck that we have a paradigm problem when we're talking about teen pregnancy. In our country, and indeed here in our state, when we talk about teen pregnancy or we talk about sex and young people, invariably that becomes a moral type conversation.
Sure.
When you look, though, at other countries that have traditionally been much more successful reducing teen pregnancy than the United States and more successful than South Carolina, their paradigm and their lens around teen pregnancy is of a public health issue. And one of the things our organization is trying to do is to move this conversation from a moral dialogue to a public health dialogue, and perhaps even further to understand that what we really have is a social dilemma on our hands.
Sure.
Because of the link that teen pregnancy has to so many other issues. And one that comes to mind, especially sitting here in the studio with you, is the link between teen pregnancy and education. Just as an example, and I won't bore you with too much data, but we know that only about 1 out of every 3 young girls that start their family as a teenager will ever complete high school. Moreover, of young girls 17 and younger who get pregnant, now wait for this, 17 and younger who get pregnant, only 2% will ever go on to get a college degree.
I know.
Only 2%. So when we're talking about advancing women in our state and advancing health and well-being overall, one of the most important things, in my slightly biased opinion, that we can do for 2 generations is to make sure that we're delaying pregnancy until a time when families are stable, relationships are stable, and children can be cared for.
I would tend to agree with that, and I think that, again, makes for healthier families, healthier communities,
Right.
In terms of the daily challenges
That's
that
right.
we all face.
That's right.
So I think we would like to see, certainly in my role, more of South Carolina citizens not just completing high school, but going on to pursue college degrees, and
Absolutely.
especially women. Depending on the statistics that you run into, anywhere between 26 and 29% of women in the U.S. today have a college degree, but in the state of South Carolina, that number is 22%. So we have a lot to do to even catch up with national averages, and we need to be working on it both in terms of policy and politics, in terms of health and well-being,
Right, sure.
and it starts at an early age.
Absolutely.
And in terms of self-confidence, I think in many cases that girls don't think that they have a place. They're trained to be nurses rather than doctors, or secretaries rather than lawyers. So having the confidence to go on to college and take care of yourself, become self-sustaining is pretty important.
And I loved your comment about it being a moral dilemma versus a public health dilemma.
Sure.
I think in terms of that, also when we think about leadership issues in general, more broadly, we talk a lot about wanting collaboration, networking, moving away from hierarchies into web structures. But when we think of leaders, just in terms of general perceptions, they are it's aggressive, it's command and control, it's so there's a disconnect between what we need in terms of leadership within the public realm and what our perceptions are in terms
Sure.
of what we think leadership is.
Without a doubt, especially when we're talking about issues like these that are incredibly complex, that require a willingness to have what I would refer to as adult conversations, and be willing to, untangle the complexities and not stomp our feet and say, this is my view and I'm not so concerned with yours. Whether it's politics or teen pregnancy or education, there's a real need for us to have a diversity of opinions at the table, and a real need for us to listen to that diversity of opinions and gather what we can to move the conversation forward.
And if I could chime in
Sure.
on that, because that was the perfect setup for me.
That was my plan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Women lead differently from men. Women tend to be more collaborative. They cross party lines. They see a project or a problem and they say, let's all get together and solve it. What are we going to do to solve it? There doesn't need to be a loser in order for there to be a winner. And women have never had those kind of hierarchical authorities that many men have. So we have to work through persuasion. I have a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, and I guarantee that I can't boss them around anymore. So, you know, I have to be inventive. I have to be inclusive in my discussions with them and make them understand their choices. In the same way, women who are leading will lead with a different style, and part of our whole goal for 2012 is to begin changing the perception of women as leaders in a government sector.
Right.
So this is, you know, we all, between teen and colleges and universities, you know, we're all heading in that same direction.
That's true. Let's talk a little bit about bright spots. You all have been working hard to advance the specific initiatives for quite a bit of time. We are making progress.
Sure.
Can you share maybe one story each about some wonderful progress that you're very proud of within the state of South Carolina?
Yeah, we had a campaign training school this past weekend in the upstate, and if I could have bottled the energy of the women that were in that room, we could win any election in this state. And it was the fourth of a series for the fall, one within 50 miles of every woman who lived in the state. We've trained right around 100 women. It's a very labor-intensive process, but part of that process is getting them over their confidence lag. And I'm very proud of the fact that of that, nearly 60% of the women have said that they are more likely to run for office, more likely or much more likely to run for office after us having done those campaign trainings than they were before. So it's baby steps, you know, one candidate at a time, but
Barbara, were there any similarities? Were they all of a certain political affiliation? Were they from the same communities? I mean, what was the diversity at that table?
It was as diverse as they come. You know, we had people who were of a Tea Party orientation, and others that were at the far left end of the spectrum. And it was funny because they came in and they sit sort of in party range or in political philosophy range. And by the time we get to lunch, they're all saying, you know, you're not so bad. Or can I get your email address? I like you. And that's how I think it happens with women as they start to listen to each other talk, where they're not talking a partisan role, that they start to see how many things they have in common rather than how many things they have that are different. And they actually pledge their willingness to work together on a lot of the things that are going forward. So it's wonderful to see. Again, it's labor intensive, but we'll just keep on plugging.
So you probably have to bridge a lot of differing perspectives to
no
make
doubt.
a bright spot in South Carolina
There's
to
no doubt.
prevent teen pregnancy. What's a great example of your work?
Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier on, we have seen tremendous declines in our state over the last decade or so, upwards of 30% declines in teen pregnancy rates in our state. And what that leads to is lots of different bright spots. But one quick anecdote that suggests we're heading in the right direction. Recently, the Centers for Disease Control awarded 10 communities across the country a multi-million-dollar, multi-year grant to come together for collaborative, community-based, multi-component interventions to reduce teen pregnancy. Only 10 communities in the country were awarded funding, and 2 of them are here in South Carolina, one of which is actually Spartanburg, and one of which is in Horry County. Now, one could say, well, that speaks to a very high need, or one might say that speaks to our potential to be successful. I choose to go with the latter and the glass half full approach, and I think we're starting to see that come to fruition in both Spartanburg and Horry County already, where communities are coming together, and yes, differing approaches, but also, you know, differing areas of the community. So parents and legislators and the business community and the faith community and the school districts all sitting at a table together, all of whom have something to contribute to this issue, all of whom may have different strategies or different approaches in mind, but everyone who ultimately is willing to do what's right and what's best for young people and to prevent teen pregnancy. And it's really nice to see come together.
That's great. What role do you all see education playing in this process?
I mentioned the link between teen pregnancy and education earlier. So now let's go the other way in terms of what can we do about education. And the easy answer here would be to say, well, we need more sex education in school, right? And that's fair. I do wish that the sex education that was being delivered in South Carolina public schools was a little better. But at the same time, make no mistake that this conversation about preventing teen pregnancy begins and ends at home, begins and ends with parents. And we can say that, but we also have to be willing to provide education to parents. This is a tricky topic, and one that parents don't do a very good job talking about. So when I think about your question of where does education play a role, I think about our need to educate parents, to educate policymakers, to educate those in the faith community, to educate the education community, to make sure that everybody knows they have a role to play in this issue. And the other piece of that is over the last 20 or 30 years, we have seen improvements and declines in teen pregnancy rates, which suggests to me that something's working, right? So part of our role in education is getting a handle on what's working and encouraging people to do more of it,
Sure.
right? We don't have to make things up anymore. We don't have to guess. We know what works. Let's do more of that.
What about education for you?
Well, education for me is a big tent. One of the things that I've mentioned is that women have a lot of personal obstacles to overcome. In many cases, we're not going to overcome those in an older generation. So we really need to turn to our youth and teach them from the very beginning that they should be running for student council when they're in middle school, or running for college student government, or participating in their on-campus political processes, that it is a part of their responsibility in a way to demonstrate that kind of leadership. And then for us, it's the baby steps one at a time, and the big picture of trying to change the understanding of women's leadership skills, women's leadership methods to the electorate, to the voting population, before we get to the polls in June and November.
I think we so often think that everyone understands the gender inequity in terms of political representation. I was with a group of high school girls just last week and talked about that within the state of South Carolina, and they were stunned. So I think we take for granted that everyone knows we have no female senators in our state house. And so the more we can educate directly in terms of certain issues and personal development, family development, but also continuing to remind people of exactly where we are and how that is the facts, and how that needs to change a little bit if we are going to advance the state of South Carolina. I would, as we continue this conversation, I would love to hear how each of your organizations impact not only the individuals that you serve specifically, but how you see your work positively impacting communities and the public at large. How do you see it from the individual to the larger community level?
Yeah, that's a great question, and for teen pregnancy specifically, we know that it really does sit at a hub of so many other issues. I was at a meeting this morning in Horry County talking about a new literacy initiative that they have. We have had conversations with you and your colleagues about the link to higher education. We've had conversations with the Department of Education and the link to school dropout. We've been able to bring the issue back to moving and advancing communities forward. And again, getting out of this kind of moral gridlock, if you will, and I'm asked all the time, are you an abstinence guy or are you a condom guy? And as Barbara said before, this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Right. The answer can be both, and in fact the answer is both.
Sure.
And when we can move beyond that gridlock and get into the dialogue of advancing family stability and advancing graduation rates and decreasing poverty and improving literacy and improving health outcomes for babies, all those things in communities, then we know we'll have started to make a real difference.
Great.
And we have a number of problems that we need to solve here in South Carolina, and wasting 51% of our brain power is a terrible loss for the state as a whole. So we need women to be in all of the public policy, whether they're elected or appointed government positions. The other thing that we need are the role models for the younger women. You know, when my 14-year-old daughter says to me, well, Mom, you're the one who's supposed to pick me up in the afternoon for school. Dad's not supposed to do that. Well, where did supposed to come up in her mind? We have one female governor. We've only had 6 women who have ever been elected in their own right in more than 250 years to either federal or statewide office in this state. 6. I mean, that's less than 1/2 of 1%. So we need to demonstrate to young girls coming up that they can do, not just be lawyers and doctors and Indian chiefs, that they can serve the public policy initiatives of the state, and they can serve their communities in a very strong leadership position.
I really want to thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Joining us on this special edition of The Big Picture.